The top business stories live from the Sky newsroom. Lift off for a third runway. The Chancellor announces government backing for a big expansion of Heathrow. Further and faster, Rachel Reeves says her plans to kickstart economic growth will put pounds in people's pockets, but warns it won't come without a fight. And also announced plans to turn Oxford and Cambridge into Europe's Silicon Valley, new reservoirs and the redevelopment of Old Trafford. Very good morning on this Wednesday. Welcome to Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. I'm going to start with that big news from the Chancellor. The construction of a third runway at Heathrow has been given government backing. Rachel Reeves says it will boost the economy and create over 100,000 jobs. In a major speech in the last hour, she's announced plans to kickstart economic growth as part of a mission to make people better off. But she admitted it won't come without a fight. Among the measures announced were improved transport connections in the north, the redevelopment of Old Trafford, and plans for new reservoirs. Let's bring in our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, who was at the speech in Oxfordshire this morning. Very good morning to you, Eds. My overall sense, there's a lot in it, but I thought it was pretty underwhelming. I'm not going to lie, Ed. What do you think of what Rachel Reeves had to say?
Well, I mean, if you look at a lot of what the Chancellor was talking about, new runways, new reservoirs, this rail link and all of the other bits that go with it between Oxford and Cambridge, and then some of the other projects as well, there was nothing in there that... Well, there were a few things in there that were new, but the vast majority of the things that we've just heard about from the Chancellor was not new. But in a sense, that's kind of her point. Her point is that a lot of these projects are kind of long-running ideas that have been knocking around for quite some time. I mean, the third runway at Heathrow is something that people have been talking about for decades. Same thing with the rail link between Oxford and Cambridge. Same thing with these reservoirs. We haven't had a new reservoir for many decades. And I think her point, and whether it indeed transpires, we'll have to remain to see. Her point is, all of these decisions thus far have been ducked. They've been ducked by successive governments. And we, she says, are the government that are going to actually deliver this stuff. And, you know, I asked whether, you know, what are our metrics for success? And to be honest with you, there aren't really new metrics of success. They've got this plan to try and increase living standards. But in terms of economic growth, the story from the UK isn't especially good. And, you know, where we are right now is the past 6 months, the economy has at best flatlined. There are big question marks about how much of that performance was to do with the gloomy outlook that we heard from the Chancellor in the months after the election, of course, running after up to the budget and the tax measures that came in there. Part of the aspiration here, and by the way, I should say, if you hear some kind of droning, some beep noises in the kind of background here, that's not accidental. There are tractors outside this location here who have been basically barricading the entrance since the Chancellor arrived earlier on. Farmers obviously furious with what was in the budget. So part of the point here is to say we are changing the tone. We're not going to admit that we're changing the tone, but we are definitely being more optimistic than we were before, and we're trying to focus on growth. The question, as you kind of allude to, is how much of this stuff is new, and how much of it will actually have an impact in the coming years? And I think those are tougher questions to answer.
And I suppose, Ed, that is what I'm trying to get at, in the sense that, yes, it is good the government are doing lots of these things that, frankly, I think most people would now admit should have been done in the past in terms of big infrastructure. Reservoirs being a perfect example of that. But this is also a government that says it constantly wants to go further and faster. And given the world we live in, given the stories that you and I have been reporting on this week around AI, for example, it feels that the government today's speeches is catching up with today rather than moving into a realm of the future. Does that kind of make sense?
I think that's a very reasonable point to make. And I mean, when you look at what's happening with AI, look at DeepSeek, this new AI challenger that's come out of China, completely changing the equation for what's happening there. And then look at what's happening in Silicon Valley. So much American dominance, some French companies as well, Chinese companies. The UK has some promising companies when it comes to AI, but we are nowhere near some of those kind of OpenAI, DeepSeek products. And so there are big question marks about where the UK is going to stand in relation to the rest of the world. But I think that, the business community certainly has been kind of here watching what's happening. And indeed, there were business leaders there in the audience, including from Heathrow, including the CBI as well, and trying to kind of get a sense of whether this is actually going to move the dial. I want to bring in Rain Newton-Smith, the Director General of the CBI, because you were there, Rain, weren't you? You were watching the speech. I guess you've been kind of waiting for this moment to arrive. Clearly, there's some scepticism about how much of this is going to make a difference, but what was your initial take?
Look, I think it was a brave and confident speech by the Chancellor today, and I think unashamedly backing the role of business in really driving growth and investment in the UK. And look, we know there are some critical decisions around our infrastructure, our aviation capacity, our rail transport connections, clean power that have been sitting on the desks of governments for many years. And I think to hear the Chancellor say she will clearly back more aviation capacity at Heathrow, she will back East-West Rail, she will back a lot of projects that are so important to driving growth. And when we talk to business leaders, they say one of the things that have been holding back their ability to make investments has been planning that is far too slow. It's not being able to find the people and access to global talent. And I think we saw some really important decisions and signals today from the Chancellor.
But another thing that's constrains business to some extent is tax. You've got the national insurance is going up. That presumably, how do you balance out that, which I know that your members are concerned about and are worried about? How do you balance out that with this stuff that's quite further off in the future potentially?
Well, a lot of the decisions that we're taking today will provide dividends over many years to come. And of course, for businesses in the everyday economy, they are absolutely balancing some of the impacts from the decisions that were taken at the budget back in November. But I think it is important that we're making some of the big calls around infrastructure investment. But as the Chancellor goes forward and as decisions that will come onto the desk around how we make sure that the make work pay, those changes in employment rights, how those are implemented in practice, it's really important that the ability for firms, those large employers who employ so many people, that we're not making it harder for them to invest and grow. And that means making sure that we don't have unintended consequences from the employment rights bill, and that we don't see further increases in taxation, and also that when we're thinking about reforms of business rates, we really think about our high streets, our manufacturers, our aviation capacity within that. But I think today the choices on the table were about making decisions for long-term growth and making bold decisions around infrastructure planning and investment, and I think business will back that.
Final question, just briefly. Do vibes matter? There's definitely kind of a question of whether the vibes have shifted here and whether that is in the same way that there was quite a bit of negativity before from the Chancellor. Do you think it'll make a difference now that she's being positive to business confidence?
Absolutely. Vibes, business, consumer confidence, animal spirits absolutely do help to drive investment. And I think being bold, being confident, being clear about the UK's amazing capabilities, whether that's Siemens Healthineers here, which create MRI scanners that are shipped around the world, whether that's thinking about some of the amazing universities across the UK, and shouting loud about our capabilities do absolutely make a difference. It's something we've been talking to the Chancellor from the moment she was appointed. We need to be bold, we need to be brave, we need to champion the role of business in the UK and our capability to the world. We've got to attract that investment from business leaders in the UK, but also from around the world.
Okay, Rain Newton-Smith, thank you very much for talking to us live on Sky News. So the view from the CBI, from business. I think people are going to be kind of just thinking about this for quite some time, given that these plans that we've just heard about from the Chancellor, as you were saying, Darren, as we were saying just a moment ago, this is long-term stuff, and it's going to take a long time to find out whether it's actually going to yield any results. One thing I would just leave you with, I did ask the Chancellor, remember before the election, one of the things that she said time and time again, and Keir Starmer as well, we're going to have a growth target. We want to be the fastest growing economy in the G7. That is very different from the living standards target that they adopted at the budget. I gave her an opportunity to reiterate that growth target today but she didn't take it. That a lot of people would look at and say, that's much less ambitious when it comes to growth than your previous target. And so it's worth just dwelling on that. Are we now in a lower growth environment with less ambition than seemed to be the case before the election? So that's the story from here in Oxfordshire. There's a drone behind me of horns from the tractors. I will leave you with that. And it is an interesting moment in UK government policy.
As I say, pretty wide-ranging, but you talk about growth, and this government needs to prove, as you've rightly pointed out, that there has to be growth this Parliament in order for the re-election, and yet the strap at the bottom talks about Heathrow, a plan, Ed, as we well know, that's going to take at least 10 years to go off the ground. We're not going to see planes in the air for probably 20 years, and God knows where we'll all be in 20 years' time, or indeed the British economy. I know you're going to speak to the Chancellor. You're interviewing her in just over half an hour's time, and we'll have coverage of that interview throughout the day. Ed, thank you very much indeed. Ed Conway there, live for us in Oxfordshire. Well, let's get more on those Heathrow plans. Let's get some reaction to it from Chris Hayward. He's policy chairman at the City of London Corporation. Very good morning, to you, Chris. First of all, your thoughts, your initial thoughts on what we've just heard from Rachel Reeves in the last hour or so.
Well, look, I think firms and businesses in the City of London will really welcome the Chancellor's announcements today, because it's one thing to talk growth, but you actually have to back it with actions. And what we've seen from the Chancellor and heard from the Chancellor this morning is actually some really bold moves in the way that she's going to remove obstacles to growth, which will actually deliver economic growth. The reality in the United Kingdom is we've had precious little growth, 15, 16 years. We talk a lot about it, but we don't actually act upon it. So I think what the Chancellor said this morning will be hugely welcomed here in the City of London.
It is welcomed, I think, by most businesses. The concern is that lots of this stuff, governments, we criticise them, don't we, when they don't make long-term decisions. You know, Heathrow, reservoirs, rail lines being good examples of all of that. And we heard a lot of that from Rachel Reeves today. But there are also people looking for short-term growth, if you like, easy things that could be done that would boost the economy over the next Parliament. And I don't think we did get much on that, did we?
Well, look, I think what we always say in respect to the financial services sector, which is a huge part of the engine for growth in the United Kingdom, is that there needs to be regulatory adjustment in financial regulation as well, so that it stimulates growth, that it makes us globally competitive. We have to remember now, we're no longer in the EU. We don't have the single market. We have to actually compete across the world. So I think actually working with the regulators as well and ensuring that we clear away those obstacles to growth is an important short-term thing that the government can do. I mean, to some extent, governments can never win. Whatever they announce, they're told, well, it won't produce immediate results. I'm afraid the world isn't like that. You know, we have to take a longer-term view. Measures announced today will take time to embed, but I think what they actually do is demonstrate that this government isn't just talking growth, it's acting growth.
Well, it's fascinating you say that, Chris, because you talked about Brexit there. It's 5 years on Friday since we left the EU. I'm not entirely sure there's anyone very happy with the current arrangement. If you wanted Brexit, you're probably frustrated that the governments are not taking advantage of the fact we've left the EU. If you want to rejoin, you think we should at least be able to get a better deal. And it is fascinating that many in business think a better arrangement with the EU would be a pretty quick way of actually bringing about some economic growth.
I think that's absolutely right, Darren. I think this government has signalled a very clear intent to a reset with our relationship with Europe. I would personally welcome that. I think many in the City of London would welcome that. And I know those discussions are ongoing. We're now, at least thanks to the Windsor framework, enabled to actually have discussions with the European Commission and with the European Parliament. And I know the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are really committed to this. And we would welcome that, because I think you're right. Europe is an opportunity, not an obstacle to growth. And we can work with our friends in Europe to actually deliver some of that growth.
OK, Chris, from the City of London Corporation, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Thank you, Chris. Well, among the Chancellor's announcement was investment linking Oxford and Cambridge with plans to create Europe's so-called Silicon Valley. Well, joining me now is Ed Bussey, Chief Executive of Oxford Science Enterprises. Ed, I'm going to put the same question to you, frankly, which is your initial impressions of what Rachel Reeves had to say this morning, particularly when it comes to Oxford and Cambridge.
Well, I mean, very positive. We've got two of the world's leading universities in that region, and those universities are generating some of the most advanced, exciting science and technology globally. And we've now established the pathways to translate that science into a very rich and exciting spin-out ecosystem in both areas. So anything that is put in place which allows us to propel that growth is a really positive thing.
And just talk us through, it's been reported in the papers today, clearly from probably the Treasury, about this idea of a new Silicon Valley here in the UK. I mean, is that really realistic? And if it is, what does it look like?
I'm always, Silicon Valley is a powerhouse of innovation, and clearly there's nothing we can say that to take away from that. And there's a lot we can learn from Silicon Valley. Equally, we have an opportunity here to build something new and different and actually innovative. We're positioned next to one of the global financial centers in London. As I say, we have a research base in this region which is second to none, ranks number one globally, sort of consistently, and has done for the last for 9 years or so. So I think we can build something which really ultimately should have its own brand. With its own advantages, and because there are some aspects of what we have here, the ingredients to do something which I think is actually potential to stand out on its own.
Ed, one thing that Oxbridge really relies upon is people, and very clever people, great scientists, great entrepreneurial people. There was no real mention of migration in that speech, apart from at the end when it comes to a question of bringing down net migration. Are you concerned that the politics, I suppose, around migration might prevent actually Oxbridge becoming the Silicon Valley of Europe?
Yeah, well, I do worry about that, and the sort of stop the boats narrative is really unhelpful in a context when you look at the incredibly exciting companies we're building across quantum, clean tech, fusion, AI, diagnostics. The reality is that when you're building these businesses, you're drawing on talent from all over the world. There's relatively small pools of talent in some of these fields, and you're hiring from Estonia, from Spain, from the US, from Canada, from New Zealand. And it's really critical that if we're going to build a really vibrant and successful, prosperous ecosystem, that we allow in on a fast track basis the world's very best talent. And when I say fast track, and I think this applies to a lot of the things we've been talking about this morning and on your program, is the need for speed. Clearly, some of the bigger infrastructure projects are going to need years. I understand that, but there are some things here. Visas. When you're in a competitive process to hire, one of the world's leading quantum computing software developers, you need these people's visas decisions agreed in hours, not weeks and months, when you're in competition with some of the big sort of tech cos.
Fascinating stuff. Ed, really appreciate your time this morning. Ed Bussey there, Chief Executive of Oxford Science Enterprises. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren.
You're watching Sky News, Business Live, busy morning. How are the markets looking today? The FTSE up a fraction, 0.31%. We'll be explaining that and getting market reaction after this quick commercial break.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the nets?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing.
A towering monument to the China dream and its demise.
From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart.
China is facing a tsunami of the elderly,
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world. Mass protests forced the president to flee. The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor. Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child. The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them. A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide. Sydney's floodplains underwater again. This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under. Sky News, the full story first. It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering, designed to humour and to help us.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
This is the game changer seat. Look, it even comes with binoculars. Fly Emirates, fly better.
All right, welcome back. Let's have a look at how the markets are doing. And US stock futures have ticked up this morning following Wall Street's rebound from a global market sell-off, meltdown effectively, as focus turns to Federal Reserve's interest rate decision and US tech earnings later on today. This is how the Asia markets finished overnight. Meanwhile, in Europe, they have started strong this morning after the Dutch AI darling ASML reported stronger than expected demand. Here in London, the FTSE is also up slightly, though it seems at the moment not massively changed because of the Chancellor's big speech. On the currencies, the dollar is still doing pretty well, strengthened by Donald Trump's recent comment on tariffs, though sterling is up against the euro. Well, let's bring in Emma Wall, even head of platform investments at Hargreaves, Lansdown. Emma, as always, a pleasure. Thank you. We've been very excited this morning about the Chancellor's speech in Oxfordshire. Have the markets?
It's been a pretty muted response. I think there's two reasons to this. A lot of what the Chancellor has talked about today will actually have the biggest impact on unlisted businesses and enterprises, so therefore not as likely to show through in the FTSE. But I also think this is a bit of the proof will be in the pudding, and we've spoken before about what it's going to take to make London a really attractive place to list again, to make the UK a really attractive place to do business. And if you look at, in particular, AI innovation, which was one of the focuses of the speech today, of course, we've got a whole other story going on across the pond about that. Actually, we see quite a lot of British businesses and British innovation go on to do brilliant things in Silicon Valley. And actually, we have a great brain drain as well. If you look at some of the top execs at the mega cap tech stocks, you've got quite a lot of British people in those roles. So there's the case of how do we retain talent, how do we encourage investment, and how do we encourage innovation. Some of these things are already in Britain, but how is public sector investment going to be matched by private sector investment? And I have to say, I think Ed Conway touched on it in his interview earlier, actually that has to come accompanied with a look again at the tax regime. If you look at why Donald Trump is doing so well so far in terms of market reaction in the US, a lot of that is down to his promise to have deregulation and cut corporate corporation and personal taxes. So it's not just enough just to invest in innovation. It's got to be coupled holistically with that 360 look, although I do think it's a good step.
Yeah, precisely. It's all very well and good, the planes landing in Heathrow, but if you can't get people to have visas from desirable backgrounds, then it's not necessarily going to spur as much economic growth as the government may well hope. Emma, let's talk about AI, the big meltdown on Monday, but things have recovered somewhat.
They have. Just to touch on that meltdown on Monday, I saw a stat earlier today that showed Nvidia lost from its market cap on Monday more than the entire market cap of Netflix, the entire market cap of MasterCard, the entire market cap of Procter & Gamble. So these were billions and billions and billions being wiped off the share price of Nvidia. Yesterday, the market rebounded around 10%, and as you touched on, actually, the futures look as if the Nasdaq and the S&P 500 will be up. There's a couple of reasons for this. Some of the news reports that came out overnight on actually calling into question potentially whether DeepSeek's financial claims of having done this for less than 6 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but actually in the world of AI is an absolute drop in the ocean. Some of that's been called into question around things like actually did they get subsidies for energy provision from the Chinese government? Were they utilising, again, just reported and not confirmed at the moment, innovation from other businesses, US companies, in fact, that they've been piggybacking on, and so therefore it's not a true reflection of the figure of the investment required. Yep. But I had a really fascinating conversation with Cathy Wood of ARC, who's sort of the innovation and AI investing queen on Monday. What she was saying actually is long term, this disruption is likely to be beneficial for the AI industry because it's a sign of maturity. Actually, the expectation that you'd continue to have US dominance and US exceptionalism in this industry was actually quite naive. In order for this to mature and in order for AI to be commoditized and really see the significant broader stock market and economic benefits, then it does need to have global competition. And that doesn't mean NVIDIA no longer continues to thrive. You know, Meta and Microsoft, who have those contracts with it, aren't going to cancel overnight, but this is a maturity.
OK, Emma, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for the market analysis there, Emma Wall. OK, that is it from me on Business Live for this morning. Of course, we're back at 4:30 this afternoon, further coverage of that big speech by the Chancellor this morning. And almost certainly it is going to come up at Prime Minister's Question Time, just about to start in the Commons with Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch. Stay tuned for Jane Secker and Beth Wrigley full analysis from midday here on Sky News.